Ah! It's the mid-year book freakout tag! Ah! Hey everyone, I'm Nikhil. Welcome back to the channel. This is Shelf-Esteem. I'm a composer for film, television, and gaming, specializing in book adaptations. You might have heard some of my music in The Wheel of Time Season 2, His Dark Materials Season 3, and the official Brent Week's companion album for his series Lightbringer. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this mid-year book freakout tag, which I'd never tried before, but thankfully Ellie from Bibbidi Bobbidi Books, linking her channel down below, definitely check it out. You know, she tagged me and Disquieting Dragons in her video, so I'm really looking forward to being a part of this tag. Thank you so much, Ellie, for tagging me. So let's dive right into the questions. Question 1. Best book you've read so far in 2024. So this is a difficult one to answer because I've read a lot of good books this year. I've talked ad nauseum on this channel about Ken Follett's Fall of Giants from the Century Trilogy. I've talked a lot about Christopher Rocchio's Disquiet Gods. And although those are contenders, I think if I had to choose one book, it would be Shogun by James Clavell. Now, Shogun is a very interesting book because the depth of the characters, the fish out of water story of this guy, Blackthorn, who crash lands in Japan, in feudal Japan in the year 1600. Could you imagine what he must have been going through, not even really knowing where he is, and then trying to understand the language? And because so much of it is talked, so much of the dialogue is through translators. So you're kind of learning Japanese as you go, and you really kind of feel like you're in Blackthorn's shoes. And it's 1,300 pages in hardcover, but somehow it just flies. Like, you would expect a book like that to drag in the middle, but it just doesn't. It's just fantastic all the way through. You know, some books have a really roaring start, a kind of a downturned middle, setting up for this grand finale. And the interesting thing about this book is it's kind of smooth sailing all the way throughout. It's great all the way throughout. So definitely check out Shogun. So glad I read it this year. Question 2, best sequel you've read so far in 2024. So there are a couple of sequels I got a chance to read. I read some Joe Abercrombie. I now am reading Winter of the World by Ken Follett. But if I had to choose just one, it would be Disquiet Gods by Christopher Rocchio. I think, you know, this late in the game, where he's on the 6th book out of 7, you would expect, okay, it's mainly a setup book to the finale. But man, I would say this is probably the best book in the series yet. The character depth, Hadrian Marlowe having to go through the events of what happened in book 5, and kind of figure out how to move forward with his life from here. And the weird, trippy, kind of mind-bending sci-fi that was so prevalent in books 2 and 3, Howling Dark and Demon in White, are on full display here. And it's kind of mind-melting stuff. Like, there was a few passages where I'm like, I need to put the book down and let my brain rest because it was very heavy on the brain. But man, what a sequel. And highly recommend you check out Sun Eater if you have not checked out Sun Eater by Christopher Rocchio. I'm linking all these books below as well so you can dive into them and we can all experience them together. Question 3, new release that you haven't read yet but want to. So I've been hearing about the Library series, I think it's called, or the Library Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. I've not read a single Mark Lawrence book yet, but those covers, I judge a book by its cover, all right? I think we all do it to some extent, let's face the facts. But those covers for The Book That Wouldn't Burn and The Book That Broke the World, I think, is the one that came out this year. They look fabulous, and the premise seems really fascinating. So I really want to check out actually both of those books. So it's kind of a cheat there because I've not read either 1 or 2, but definitely want to check out that sequel and also the first book. Hopefully this year if I can get around to it. Question 4, most anticipated release for the second half of the year. It's a toss-up for me. I mean, John Gwynn's Bloodsworn saga, the trilogy, is going to conclude. But if I had to choose just one for the end of the year, it would be Stormlight 5, Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. I've been reading every book as they've been coming out, and I've been loving the world. And I think, like, the 4th book, 1,300 pages on hardcover, it was very much a setup book to the 5th one, and I'm very curious to see how Brandon Sanderson sticks the landing and for the repercussions that will probably take place in his greater Cosmere universe. If you don't know about Brandon Sanderson's work, he has this Cosmere, which are a series of interlinked series, and if Stormlight is kind of his pinnacle series, his centerpiece series. So whatever happens in this 5th book, I think is going to have overarching consequences throughout the Cosmere at large. So I'm very excited to see kind of how that develops. I'm really excited for December 6th. So number 5, biggest disappointment. Hard to say. I don't think any book really disappointed me as such in this year. But I would say if I had to choose one, and it's funny to choose this one because I actually liked it, generally speaking, as a whole. I think I gave it like a 3 out of 5. And that was House of Small Shadows by Adam Neville. Now, I only found it disappointing because of the last third of the book. I think the first 2/3 set up the eeriness and the atmosphere just perfectly. And if it had carried in that last third, like the first 2/3, I would have probably rated this like a 4.5 out of 5. So it was just unfortunate that that last third kind of fell short for me. And I was a little disappointed with the way it ended. And, it was my first Adam Neville novel, and I've been really looking forward to reading his work. So I'm hoping that the next stuff I read, I think Last Days is one, The Ritual is another one. I want to read a couple more of his works. So, I'm hoping that those are even better, and it's a sign of at least good things to come. Number 6, biggest surprise. I think, probably comes as no surprise to you all, but the biggest surprise for me this year definitely was Ken Follett. I had heard so much about Pillars of the Earth and, just his thriller writing, and I hadn't read very much historical fiction. Shogun was actually the first historical fiction novel that I've ever read. So I was interested in exploring more of the genre, and at the risk of burning myself out on James Clavell, he has all these 1,300-page chonkers. So I decided to go for another author that creates 1,000 to 1,300-page chonkers, and that was Ken Follett. And this book was, of course, book 1 of the Century Trilogy, Fall of Giants. Question number 7, favorite new author, debut or new to you? So again, I'm just going to have to go for my man, Ken Follett, because if, that book is any indication, the Century Trilogy is not even as talked about as Pillars of the Earth is, and his Kingsbridge series. So if this particular book is any indication of his writing, then I'm going to have a great time exploring his entire catalog. I kind of put up a video about my auto-buy authors as well, which I'm linking up here. And Ken Follett made it on the list, only having read one of his books. And now on to the second one. So Ken Follett for number 6 and number 7. Question 8, newest fictional crush. That's a hard one to say. I don't know. If I had to think off the top of my head, I would say probably Ken Follett's Fall of Giants has this woman named Ethel, who I don't want to spoil really what happens to her, but she goes through a lot of trials and tribulations in it, in the advent of World War I, and kind of the person she has an illegitimate child with, and she's kind of outcast. She takes those circumstances and turns it around and just becomes a badass. And I just really admire her perseverance and kind of strength of character. So I would say probably Ethel would be my fictional crush for that first book in the Century Trilogy. Number 9, newest favorite character is... It's tough to say. I'm just looking at my Goodreads list here. I would say probably, if I had to choose one, it would be one that had the biggest turnaround for me. How about that? So when I was reading the Wax and Wayne quadrilogy, Era 2 of Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, Wayne was always a character I didn't really resonate with. His humor didn't really land for me. And it seemed like, in the first couple of books, at least to me, he seemed a little bit more of a shallow character that was there more for comedic relief. But man, I read The Lost Metal as part of a read-along with Bookish Chaz, Chaz from Bookish Chaz, and Carl from Geek on My Sleeve. I'm linking them below as well. And Wayne's character arc and kind of redemption in that book really turned it around for me. And actually, I really found him a lot funnier in Lost Metal than I did in the previous books. So, I would say Wayne from the Wax and Wayne quadrilogy by Brandon Sanderson, that would probably be my turnaround character and my newest favorite character. Number 10, books that made you cry. So I'm not much of a crier when I read. I gotta say, I do get emotional. Things affect me emotionally, but I'm not necessarily overtly crying about them. But I would say if there was one that really moved me the most, it would be Cujo. Everybody kind of knows the idea of this Cujo being a dog that turns rabid and goes on a rampage, right? No real secret there, no real spoiler there. But, the idea that Cujo is such a good dog that gets turned by rabies, the whole thing feels like a tragedy. And it made me really sad reading it, honestly. It's a very moving, heartfelt, poignant book, but also very brutal and very vicious. So I'm going to be talking about that one with Disquieting Dragons in a future video. So I'm looking forward to kind of doing a deeper dive into that. But that was the book that got me closest to crying. Book that made me happy. I've read a lot of very downtrodden books this year. But if I had to say one that really made me happy, it was probably Fall of Giants by Ken Follett. I know I keep talking about this book, but I'm very new to the historical fiction genre. And that particular book just really made me excited about the possibilities, not only for discovering a new favorite author in Ken Follett, but also being able to read more of the Century Trilogy, get to understand more about world events from a different perspective, from the ground floor as the characters are experiencing it themselves. So that book made me the happiest from the implications of my TBR, I think, in the months to come. Number 12, favorite book to film adaptation that you've seen this year. So I would probably say it would be Dune Part 2. So I had watched Part 1 in the theaters. I absolutely loved it. I think it has done such a good justice to the book. I'd read the book a few years ago, and I thought that the stuff that was eliminated, I could live with, and the stuff that it accentuated, I absolutely love seeing it brought on screen. Now, I thought Dune Part 2 was even better than the first, and I didn't know that, it could be. Like, the Part 1 set up such a high bar, but it was also very much a setup to Part 2, and I felt like the payoff was really, really evident in that movie. So let me know in the comments if you had other adaptations you watched, because as a film and TV composer, I'm absolutely obsessed with adaptations. I love reading source material, watching adaptations, pitching for adaptations, writing on adaptations, and so I'm always interested to talk about that. So let me know in the comments. Most beautiful book I bought this year. So that's hard to say. I would say, if I had to choose, I've always loved Christopher Rocchio's covers, and Disquiet Gods is no exception. So I really loved the way that book looks. I love the way all the books in that series look. And even though he changed publishers, he managed to, and the publisher managed to kind of retain the greatness of what makes his artwork so great. And the artists that he used were fantastic as well. So I would say probably that's the most beautiful book I've gotten. But I've not really gotten any special editions this year. I've been trying to kind of go for more used books and other stuff, just to see. Sometimes it's nice to get original editions that are a little worn. It's kind of fun to have those on your bookshelves as well, right? What books do you need to read by the end of the year? God, so I've made a whole video on that. But I have a bunch of series that I really want to finish by the end of the year. I'll highlight a couple here, but the full video is actually up here. I'm linking it up here. But I would say I want to finish that Century Trilogy by Ken Follett, because I really want to know what happens to these characters and the generations to come as they experience these world events. I definitely want to read some more Stephen King. I want to get to different seasons this year if I can. I want to finish the Expanse series. I have a few more books to go, so quite a few books I have on deck for this year. And of course, John Gwynn's Bloodsworn Saga, and I haven't read any of those yet, so I'm going to read the trilogy back to back to back. And so I have my reading goals cut out for me, I guess. And then the last question is, what favorite manga have you read this year? So unfortunately, I have not read any manga. So my wife, Linda, is really into manga, and she loves reading manga. But I have not actually dived into it yet. So let me know in the comments what you think I should start. And let me know if for those of you who watch this channel, let me know if you think manga would be a good place to kind of throw up some videos and kind of record my reactions, unedited thoughts to reading some of those. So that was something I've been thinking about for a while as well. So I figured I'd answer that question to kind of pose the question to you all in terms of what you'd like to see on this channel and what I should read. And with that, that's the 15 questions for the mid-year book Freakout tag. It was an honor to be a part of it. Thank you, Ellie from Bibbidi Bobbidi Books, again for tagging me. And I'm really looking forward to making this a dialogue, hearing what you all have been reading. Feel free to answer the questions in below and let me know kind of where you've been at this year. And let's make this rest of 2024 freaking fantastic, both from a personal standpoint and from a reading standpoint. So that's it from me. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. I'll see you next time. Take care.